On March 11, 2011, what started as just another Friday in Japan spiraled into one of the most terrifying chain reactions in modern history. You see, this wasn't just one single disaster. It was a cascade of catastrophes, a series of dominoes where each one that fell triggered the next, and each one was more devastating than the last.
Just let that sink in for a moment. That was the grim reality on the ground. A statement so stark, so chilling, it just forces you to ask, how? How on earth did things get this bad? To even begin to understand, we have to go back to the moments right before the world cracked open. Before the main event, the Earth wasn't completely silent. There were warnings, pretty powerful tremors actually. But in a country like Japan, a place that's so accustomed to earthquakes, they were mostly dismissed as just business as usual. This timeline really shows you just how fast everything fell apart. So on March 9th, a big 7.2 foreshock hits, followed by 3 more strong quakes. But life went on. Then on Friday, March 11th at 2:45 in the afternoon, the early warning system kicks in. High-speed trains grind to a halt, factory lines stop, all pretty routine stuff. But just 1 minute later, the ground started to shake with a force that nobody, and I mean nobody, was prepared for. And that was it, the first domino. This was an earthquake of almost unimaginable power that started deep under the Pacific Ocean. And it wouldn't just shake a nation. It was about to shake the entire planet.
The number itself is just staggering. A 9.1 magnitude underwater megathrust earthquake. To put that in perspective, this was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in the history of Japan, and one of the most powerful ever recorded on Earth, period.
And it just kept going. For 6 endless minutes. Can you imagine that? For 6 solid minutes, the ground did not stop moving. High-rises in Tokyo, more than 200 miles away from the epicenter, were swaying back and forth the whole time. There was literally nowhere to hide. The sheer force of it was geological. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. It was so immense that it physically shoved the main island of Honshu nearly 8 feet to the east. The country was literally pushed out of place by the power unleashed from the ocean floor. And this wasn't just some local event. Oh no, the energy that was released was so massive that seismographs all over the globe picked it up. It even caused our entire planet to wobble on its axis. A truly global tremor. But the earthquake, as absolutely terrifying as it was only the trigger. Its violence displaced a colossal amount of water, giving birth to the second and far, far deadlier domino, the tsunami. And this is where we see a tragic, critical flaw in the first response. The initial warnings, they predicted waves around 20 feet high, but way out at sea, a GPS buoy was telling a completely different and horrifying story. The sea level was rising faster and higher than anyone had imagined. Japan's massive seawalls, they were built for waves, not for the wall of water that was heading their way.
In Myaku City, the tsunami reached a recorded height of nearly 131 feet. That's higher than a 10-story building. This wasn't a wave you could outrun or survive. It was an unstoppable force of nature that just wiped entire towns right off the map. To really feel the human cost, you have to look at what happened at the Noeru school. About 200 people were sheltering there after the earthquake. They thought they were safe. When someone ran in shouting that the tsunami was coming, it was already too late. The water just tore through the building, and in an instant, 74 children and staff were gone. But even in that absolute chaos, you find these moments of incredible bravery. A teacher, David Shum, talked about seeing his students struggling in the water. He just started grabbing them, pulling them one by one to safety, even as he and a few kids clung to a floating desk. It's just a testament to the human spirit in the face of pure horror.
So as the water finally pulled back, it left behind unimaginable destruction. But a new threat, a silent and invisible one, was just getting started. The natural disaster had just triggered a technological one at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant.
The meltdown was just this cascade of failures. First, the earthquake cuts the main power. Okay, no problem, right? The backup diesel generators kick in automatically. But then, that 49-foot wave slams into the plant. It floods the basements and completely destroys those generators. So now there's no power at all. The cooling systems fail, the reactors start to overheat, and that creates a massive buildup of explosive hydrogen gas. And then, the inevitable happened. A series of huge explosions blew the reactor buildings apart.
As the crisis just spiraled out of control and most people were being evacuated, a small group of workers made a choice. They stayed behind. They became known to the world as the Fukushima 50. Now, these weren't soldiers. They were just ordinary engineers and technicians who decided to stay and fight, knowing full well they were being exposed to deadly levels of radiation.
One of the engineers, Atsufumi Yoshiawa, really captured their mindset perfectly. He said that the fear was totally natural, but what pushed back against that fear was this overwhelming sense of duty. They didn't stay because they were fearless. They stayed because they felt like they had to.
Now, the actions of the Fukushima 50 absolutely helped prevent an even worse catastrophe, but this triple disaster had already left deep, lasting scars, not just on Japan, but on the entire world.
For so many, the pain is still raw. Take Mio Kimura. He lost his wife, his father, and his 7-year-old daughter, Yuna, in the tsunami. More than a decade later, while the remains of everyone else from his town have been found, Yuna is still missing. His search for her continues to this day, a heartbreaking symbol of the unresolved grief for thousands of families.
When you finally look at the numbers, the sheer scale of it all is just mind-boggling. Nearly 20,000 people lost their lives. Over 100,000 were displaced just by the nuclear crisis alone. And the total financial cost, it topped $235 billion, making it the single most expensive natural disaster in all of human history.
And the legacy of that day is still with us. The Fukushima cleanup is the costliest nuclear accident in history. Debris from the tsunami still washes up on the shores of North America, and huge areas around the plant are still completely uninhabitable, a permanent radioactive scar on the landscape.
Which really leaves us with one final lingering question. We know that natural disasters on this scale are inevitable. They happen. But was the technological catastrophe that followed, the nuclear crisis that poisoned the land and displaced hundreds of thousands of people, was that also inevitable, or was it a failure that we could have and should have prevented?